welcome everybody. Um, Thanks for joining today. This is going to be fun. I was curious if anyone is going to be at DevOps Days in Kansas City coming up next week. If you are, come look for me. My son and I are going to be presenting at the end of the first day. We're going to be doing some pair programming, so I'm looking forward to that. So if you happen to be there, come find us and say hello. Okay, Greenfield landmines, hidden dangers when starting with a clean slate. Oops, that's not on. Let's see. Okay, guess I got to do it by hand this time. Okay, so we're going to be looking at what it means to have a Greenfield project, how that compares to a legacy project, and talk about some of the dangers that are easy to overlook when you're dealing with Greenfield. So, what is Greenfield development? So some of the different definitions that you'll find. Well, one thing that if we think of what isn't Greenfield development, it's like when you don't have to be in a situation where you say, we had to do this because 3 years ago this thing happened or we required whatever, or situations where you don't have to say this was the technology that was chosen before we knew about X, Y, and Z. So those are all things around kind of why Greenfield development is very appealing, because it means you're not having to deal with all these choices from the past. And we're going to get more into the definition just in a minute. I also want to call out that when Greenfield development can be two different things. It can be creating an entirely new system, which is hard. And it can also be replacing an existing system. So taking an existing system, saying we're going to rewrite this from scratch, from the ground up, which often is excruciatingly difficult because it's very hard to get anything to the point that you can actually get it deployed when everybody has expectations based on what the previous system does, even if they're things that no one's actually using. I've seen several times where people are saying, yes, we've got these 200 reports and there's no possible way to go live until every single one of those 200 reports is actually done. And on one project I was on, they came up with the idea. I don't think they actually did this, but it made the point. They said, okay, we'll just say that all 200 reports are done. And then whenever someone can't do something, they'll fire a bug report for it. And then we'll go ahead and make that report available. And after they said this, people are like, okay, well, maybe we aren't actually going to use all 200 reports, and they were able to winnow it down to the things they're actually being using. But Greenfield can be a new system. It can also be replacing an existing system. Sometimes it would seem that replacing an existing system would be easier, but often due to the politics around it, it can be even more difficult. So, are you working on a Greenfield project? So this should pop up in the side for you here. The squawk test, that's a good name for that. I like that. Okay, so it should pop up you should be able to get to Slido in a couple different ways. If you click on the arrow or the three dots down in the lower left-hand corner, you can choose it. You can also go to slido.com and bring it up on the, just type in that number. So let's get everybody up with this and keep it up because we'll be using it as we go. And at the end, we will be giving away one of our newly printed t-shirts, the Agile Lunch and Learn t-shirt. I think I've got medium and larges and extra larges I have not printed yet. But anyway, so get this up. You'll have a chance to win a t-shirt to make it fun when we get to the end of things. Okay, are you working on Greenfield projects? So it looks like we've got 2 responses so far. And we're at 50-50. Half of us are and half of us aren't. So go ahead and bring that up. And if you are having trouble getting to Slido for some reason, type something in the chat and we can see what's going on. You should be able to get it. Like I said, in the lower right-hand corner, there should be 3 dots. And if you click on that, you can click on it and it will give you Slido just right there for you. Okay, so it looks like we're about roughly half and half. No, a little bit less. Most of us are in Greenfield. There may be some self-selection going on, that the people that are interested in Greenfield pitfalls tend to be people working on Greenfield projects. So the Slido link, you should be able to get to it by clicking on the 3 dots in the lower left-hand corner. Here, I can get it for you really fast. If we go to Slido and then go to that number, still not typing in the right place. throw this in the chat here. There. So if you need the chat, it's probably easier to do inside of WebEx, but if you need it, there it is in the chat. Okay, so it looks like we've got half of us are not, and then the other half are, it was originally Greenfield, but not anymore, or yes, we're working on a Greenfield project. So what does Greenfield mean? And Wikipedia says Greenfield projects are ones that are not constrained by prior work. And I like this idea of thinking about how our projects are constrained in our decisions. We can make certain decisions on some projects that we just aren't able to make on another. If you have a project that is built for years and years with the database and lots of logic built into the database, you probably can't just swap out the database. It may not necessarily be a bad thing. You may be gaining something for that, but that's one of the constraints that you have, or based on decisions that were made previously. But I'd like to suggest that some of this is, while there's a spectrum here, it doesn't take very long before we've gotten to the point that we're actually constrained by prior work. So here's a very simple method, a main method, and there's nothing here. And then we make it to where it prints out hello world. And at this point, we're constrained by prior work, because maybe I don't want to say hello world. I want to say hello Mark. And now we're going to have to change something that's there. So there's some type of constraints. It's not a big constraint. It's easy to change. So maybe this isn't the best definition. Maybe there's a better way to define it. So clearly there's a spectrum of what's considered Greenfield, right? If I just have to go in and change one line of code and it's easy to do and safe to do, I'm probably not going to consider that to be, oh, I'm no longer Greenfield. So let's think for a minute and think about what is the opposite of Greenfield. And maybe if we kind of define the opposite, it'll give us a better idea of what Greenfield actually is. And usually when we think of opposite of Greenfield, we're going to be talking about legacy systems. So Merriam-Webster defines legacy systems as of or relating to being a previous or outdated computer system. So usually thinking of something that maybe is past its prime, or it's older and there's Brownfield. Yes, that's the name. Okay, seeing some focus problems. I'll try not to move around as much. Let me move something over here. I lost my remote, so I'm jumping around more. We'll see if that helps. So how does a Greenfield project stop becoming a Greenfield project anymore? And so the side note here, let's talk about just kind of how we use the language for things. This is from a essay called Giving Things Name by Hayakawa. I think it was the father and son. And they did a lot of stuff in linguistics. And they give this example that I really liked. And it said these villagers are living together and they're all farmers of different types and stuff. And this new type of animal comes in. And these are what's represented by the animals. And the farmers discover different things based on what they're looking for. So one of them, the grain farmer, discovers that the small ones eat his grain, but the big ones don't. And so he has a name that differentiates between the ones that eat grain and the ones that don't. Somebody else discovers, he lives on a farm that has lots of rocks and snakes, and he discovered the curly-tailed ones will eat the snakes. So the ones over there will eat the snakes, but the ones with straight tails don't. So he's got a name for them that's based on what's important to him, which is getting rid of snakes. And somebody else discovers that he tries to pet them. He's trying to figure out if they make good pets. And he finds out the ones with round heads bite, but the one that with square heads don't. So he has a name that divides these things up based on the shape of their heads, because that's what's important to him, because he doesn't like getting bitten, and for some reason he wants to pet these things. And then somebody else discovers he's in need of food, and he discovers the ones that with the square heads and curly tails are good to eat and taste something like chicken, but the others are no good at all. So the point is, they're all talking about the exact same things, but if they get together and try to talk using the names that they've given for things, it's not like there's a one-to-one correspondence. They have very different ways based on what was important to them. And I think this is important when we're thinking about Greenfield and legacy systems, is what's actually important to us about the way that we're naming things, because otherwise we're going to talk about stuff in ways that mean completely different things to each other. So what's important, in this case, what was important, they were more concerned about eating snakes, eating your grain, or biting, or whether it's edible. So we give names to things based on what's useful to us. So how should we define Greenfield versus legacy? So how would you define a legacy project? Not a long definition, but just how would you say, if somebody said, well, what is a legacy project? What would you say is true about a legacy project that defines it? If you type it in the Slido link, it should come up here where everybody can see it, or you can type it in the chat too. How would you define legacy? So legacy project is one that exists currently and perhaps is deployed. Okay, so that definition basically means it's in use, I think, is what you're saying. Brownfield is how you describe a legacy project. A project that's been in production for a while. This is the way we've always done things. It's been operational for many years. Lots of features users are already familiar with. Outdated code base. System without tests. I like that one. A Gordian knot of previous decisions. That is a great description. Use existing technology and code and has been around for a while. One that iterates on currently in use systems. A project that's in use and will have historical data that's valuable to the user. So that's an interesting definition. It's got historical data in it, which gives you some constraints on what you can do. You can't just blow the whole thing away. One that predates many or most of the people working on it, which probably implies there's a lot of people that don't know why various decisions had been made in the past. A system that's been used in a while but is on an old tech stack. Work that's been previously shipped and met the original scope. So something that maybe it met the needs at one time, but maybe there's new needs that it doesn't meet, and we now need to change it. And then we discover all these other things about it that no one knows how it works and stuff. So these are all the like the animals we just looked at. None of these are bad definitions. These are all good definitions of legacy systems. But I would like to say that for the most part, the thing we're probably most concerned about when we think of Greenfield is, can we change it? Because if I have something that is very easy, if you think about the benefits of a Greenfield, like you're starting from the very beginning, and you have the ability to, if you make it, you can make whatever decision you want. Like, I'm going to make this do X, Y, and Z. And if you start going that way, you're like, no, it really needs to do Q, R, S, and T, or whatever. I can change that in a Greenfield system. I'm not constrained from what I can actually make changes with. And I like, so Anita just said that new changes are expensive, and I think that's a very good definition of it. So I would like to submit that the real differentiation here between whether something is greenfield or legacy, or where it is along that spectrum, is going to be, can we actually change it? And there's a few quotes here that I think kind of back that up. Eli Lopian says, and I don't know if that's how I pronounce the name or not, but he says, legacy code is code that developers are afraid to change. And I like calling out that fear, because there's lots of things that are possible to change, but no one in their right mind is actually going to try to touch because they don't want to ruin their weekends and everything. So the idea of it being something that you're actually afraid to mess with is, I think, is a good way of thinking of it. Michael Feathers actually said legacy code is code without tests. And this is really getting to the exact same point that Eli was making, that if I don't feel safe in trying to change it, I'm not going to be comfortable trying to make a change to anything. Even if we attempt to change and our tests say, hey, you shouldn't do that, that is a much better position. This breaks these things over here. That is still a very good position to be in. The bad position to be in is if I deploy or if I make a bunch of changes and the only way I find out about it is when users start calling me in the middle of the night because the system doesn't work. So legacy code being code without tests, things that we cannot change and prove it does what we expect it to do. So what attributes do you feel are most important in calling something greenfield? Is it that there's no code already written? Is it that the code is easy and safe to change? The effort to change key technologies is less than the effort of rewriting the system, or past decisions were made by people who are still on the team? So Astra's got a good point. When you're afraid to push on Fridays, then you are in a legacy system. That is a very good point. Very good point. Okay, so it looks like most of us are kind of in the camp of saying the existing code is easy and safe to change. I probably should have asked this before I said that multiple times, because maybe there's no code. A lot of us are saying that there's no code already written, in which case the only time you have a greenfield project is before you write your first line of code. The effort to change key technologies is less than the effort of rewriting the system. And that's a definition that I find interesting, because I've been on worked with systems that have been around for many years, but because of the way that they were constructed and the way that they were tested, they were able to do things like swap out databases and things like that. I've also been on other systems that have only been around for a few months where it would be impossible to do that because of lack of tests and because of just how things were designed. And then the last one here, we've got past decision made by people who are still on the team. So, like I said, none of those are necessarily right or wrong, but it is helpful to think about when we're writing software. We say we want to stay away from, we want to keep our software from being legacy as long as possible. How are we defining that? That might be important to keep in mind. Okay, so now the title of this talk was the minefield. So what we're going to look at here is some of the things that if you have a greenfield project, and let's assume it's a project that you can change easily because it hasn't been around for years. You don't have all this baggage that's determining what you have to do next. We'll use that kind of as a general definition for it. So we're going to look through, I think, about 5 things that I see as minefields based on experience I've been on. I've been on some projects that were greenfield development that were extraordinarily successful, like on the tune of delivering something for $15 million that they thought were going to cost $50 million. I've also been on greenfield projects that got the exact opposite results, where they spent a whole lot of money and never were able to deliver things for various reasons. And we'll talk about some of those things as we go. Legacy need not have a bad meaning. It has it in other crafts, a well-tested system that's easy to change. I name them. So the definition that I've heard most used for legacy is something that where it, because it's been around so long, for whatever reason, it has now become hard to change. I don't think I've ever heard somebody refer to a system that's really easy to change as being a legacy system. And I think part of the reason for that is because if they continue to change things whenever there's a new need, the system they have today is probably significantly different than the one that they had 2 or 3 years ago because it's continued to evolve. So just a thought. Heritage system, old but easy to change. I like that. That's great. Okay, so first minefield, no constraints. So you may have heard this quote by Margaret Travel. It says, "When nothing is sure, then anything is possible." Right? If we've got no constraints, anything is possible. Anything being possible is great for Disney musicals, but probably bad for decision making. So imagine this. So we're talking to somebody like, what should we have for dinner? So, well, what ingredients do we have? We've got beans, chips, and olives. How about nachos? Sound good. Okay. That is a simple decision-making process, right? We're constrained. We only have 4 ingredients and they're just the things that we need to make nachos. That's a very easy decision-making process. But what about this? What should we make for dinner? What ingredients do we have? We've got onions, pear, horseradish, cilantro, red pepper, flake, rice wine, cashew nut, canola oil, flax seeds, oatmeal, lime. Okay, this is going to be a very long decision-making process. It's going to take a very long time to figure out what we want to make because we have so many possibilities now. Now, it's not bad to have those possibilities, but if we were to introduce a few constraints, we may be able to make decisions faster. And this is one thing we need to watch out for when we have no constraints, when we're working on a greenfield project. If we feel there are no constraints, we may do a lot of things that are really inefficient, particularly in the ways we make decisions. It's easy to get so focused on the value of making a perfect decision that we overlook the cost that goes into making that decision. In a lot of cases, moving forward is more valuable than being perfect. The cost of making a perfect decision is greater than the value of making a good decision and then adjusting as we learn more. In a lot of cases, there are decisions that probably don't matter. Down the road, it doesn't matter if you chose to do this or this. Sometimes that maybe you've got 2 fairly equivalent databases. Half the team likes one, half the team likes the other. It may not matter what you choose. If you get so caught up on it taking a really, really long time to go ahead and start implementing for one of those and start getting feedback from it, that cost may be greater than the value of choosing one that, like, later on you decide, oh, this one is 2% better than the other one. And you're probably more likely to discover what you don't know if you go ahead and make the decision to move forward. So in some cases, in some cases, constraints will actually help you move forward more rapidly. And if you're working on Greenfield, you've got to watch out for situations where it's like, oh, we could use anything. We could put all this information on the blockchain. In most industries that we all probably work in, if the solution to something is like, if you're on a Greenfield project and one of the first things that gets thrown out there is that you could put it on the blockchain, that might be an indication that you need some more constraints around it, the decision-making process. Okay. Minefield number 2, or I guess we'll call these individual mines. So mine number 2, things to watch out for. Solving hypothetical problems, especially at the expense of non-hypothetical problems. So if you've got a system and the users can't create an account, If you spend all your time trying to figure out whether the users would prefer autocomplete on searching and how to implement autocomplete, which is a nice to have, you can search without having the autocomplete. The users preferring autocomplete for searching is a hypothetical problem at this point because you can't even create an account. You can't have any users. The hypothetical problem should not become more important than your actual problem, which is no one can actually get into the system. If you don't have any working software yet, so that's one issue, or your database might be slow with 1,000 users. One of these is hypothetical, one of these is real. The real thing is you don't have any working software to even discover where your bottlenecks are. But a lot of times you'll see situations where people become so, I'll use the word obsessed, with trying to figure out how to make the database fast that they never get to the point, the project even gets canceled before they have anything that users could actually do something with. It's not that the database being slow isn't important, but do you even know if you can get 1,000 users? Maybe you'd only get 100 users, that's all the people that would use the system, and maybe the database would be just fine with that. So it's not saying just ignore the fact that we need to think about how can we optimize things, but if we're spending all of our times on these hypotheticals instead of actually solving what the issue that's in front of us, which is we don't have any working software, it's going to come back to bite us. And I've been on projects where, and it's heartbreaking to see, but there were enough people focused on the hypothetical problems that the project they weren't able to deliver enough working software to keep the confidence that the system was going to work. And the project got canceled after spending several $1,000,000 on it. And a lot of people put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it, but they were working on hypothetical problems over the real problems, which was, can we start making progress toward delivering this piece of software? If you do not have any deployed code, you do not have a scaling problem. You have a we haven't created any useful software problem. These are not the same thing, right? We can spend lots of time solving scaling problems on software that hasn't even been created. Probably better off creating the software and start trying to bring those risks forward so we can actually experience them. Okay, mine number 3, agendas. Now, you've probably never had this happen on your projects, but this has happened on some projects I've seen, where there's different agendas behind the decision-making process. And these different agendas people with agendas seem to be especially attracted to Greenfield projects because there's things they can do on Greenfield projects that they'd never get away with doing on legacy projects. So for example, sometimes people want to join a project just because they want to use a particular technology. Now that's not in and of itself a bad thing, but kind of like I was talking about blockchain, if your goal is to use blockchain and you're just trying to find a Greenfield project so you can shoehorn it into that may not be in the best interest of the project. I've one project I worked on years ago, there had been a quote from one part of the organization, and they said it was going to take 50 people to deliver this software. We ended up doing it with about 5 developers and 2 or 3 coaches, and in less time and for a fraction of the budget. Later on, as I discovered things, a lot of what was motivating that part of the organization that had come up with the original quote, and we were still working with them to some extent, but the way that you got promoted is by having more people that you managed. And so instead of looking at what was actually best for the project, all the decisions were being made by how can we get a larger team. That wasn't the best way to make decisions for the project, but it was the agenda behind the way a lot of decisions were being made. And it's a lot easier to do that with a Greenfield project than to take a legacy project that's out there that's been working with 10 people for many years and try to convince people you need 5 times as many people. That's hard. That's a lot easier to do with a Greenfield project when there's lots of unknowns around it. I've also seen Greenfield projects that attracted people because they wanted to build a framework to do particular things. Whether or not they actually needed a framework for anything, but that was driving a lot of the decisions they were making and why they were attracted to the project. And in this particular case, they built out a pretty extensive framework for things. Finally, that person left, and the first thing everybody did was tear out the framework because it had just gotten in the way of everything. I'm sure that has never happened to any of you where like somebody builds something and I've also seen people motivated by showing everyone the right way to do it, which on its surface kind of sounds good. But in this particular case, it came down to building out extensive amounts of pipeline to deploy the code that hadn't been written yet. And wouldn't you know it, once we started actually writing the code, it turned out the pipeline was not very good at deploying the type of code that we were trying to write. But that was all motivated by trying to say, if we make all the decisions right at the beginning, so let's not start working on the project, the actual code, until we built out all this stuff that was somebody's baby to try to deliver because they wanted to see it done in this way. Another thing that can be a minefield or an agenda is using a particular management approach. Now, that doesn't mean that a particular management approach is good or bad, but if we're using it just because, if that's driving our decisions more so than the idea of making the project successful, that could be a minefield for us. Okay, minefield number, I think this is 3 or 4. I should have numbered these. Premature scaling teams. We talked a little bit about this on scaling the software, but prematurely scaling teams. So imagine this conversation. We're talking to our good friend Robin again, and say, we should start a business. They say, great, I'll start hiring people. And we say, shouldn't we figure out what the business will do before we start hiring people? And then Robin writes back and says, I just hired 20 bricklayers, 25 water treatment engineers, and signed a 5-year contract with a troupe of Chinese acrobats. Your response might be something like, we need to talk. So, well, maybe next week. I'm boarding a plane to interview some Mongolian throat singers now. Okay. Now, this seems silly, right? Haha, there's no way that would happen. I have seen this happen on software teams to where they're getting started on development. They don't really even know who they need yet, but they're so worried about not having people available that they hire people that end up actually slowing the process down. And like I said, there's lots of cases where you can do something with 5 to 10 people that 50 people would make it nearly impossible to get anything done. And when we see this example like this, it's easy to say, okay, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But really think about, particularly on a Greenfield project, are we scaling stuff before we have any proof, any evidence of what we need to build? Any evidence of what it's going to take, any evidence of the actual skills we need, because the skills we think we need going into it may look a lot different once we actually start doing development work. Another thing, I've heard this quote somewhere, but if you can't get a 5-person team to deliver working code, what makes you think you can do it with 20 teams? So oftentimes we're so focused on scaling that we stop to ask ourselves, do we actually have any skill at the thing we're trying to scale? If we're not good at doing something with 5 people, the idea of saying now we're going to create 20 teams with 10 people on them, we're not going to make things better, right? Scaling something up before you figured out how to do it is not a good recipe for success. Let's say you're wanting to build a house. Well, it would make sense to maybe start with a shed, but you're going to build a house. You should build a house and learn from it, right? And then maybe you can build another house. But if you're learning how to build a house, the worst thing you could do is say, we're going to start 20 houses all at the same time and work them through stage by stage. And then when we discover that we misunderstood something about how to make a foundation, we now have to fix it in 20 houses instead of just one. So that's what you want to watch out for, is trying to scale things up in your team before you actually have evidence of what's needed. So make sure you've got something worth scaling before you put a lot of effort into scaling. This is true when it comes to your software. If you don't have a good business case for your software, it doesn't matter if you can scale it up, right? No one's going to use it. If you don't have a team that is a process for developing software that works efficiently, you definitely don't want to scale it up because it's going to be very inefficient and expensive. Okay, next minefield, deep instead of wide. So think of these two situations. You have a single beautiful page with every styling, input, validation, etc. But it's a single page. You can't really do anything with it, but you can show people this single page and how beautiful it is. As opposed to having rough pages that let you walk through the functionality. So if you think here, I don't know if I'm assuming a lot of you have seen Craigslist. It is not a beautiful application, right? But it's got all the pages you need to actually use it. If Craigslist had spent all their time trying to design a beautiful single page and spent all their time on that, and I'm thinking back when they first started, they would not have captured the market the way that they captured it. They got something very functional out the door, and even now they're like, it's functional, why would we invest more money in it? And they've made improvements over time in different things, particularly on the spam side of things. But rough pages that let you walk through the functionality and let people actually experience things are way more valuable than trying to do the entire thing perfect. If you build the complete single beautiful page with every styling, input, validation, and continue to do that for everything through a process, and then you discover your customer tries to use it and says, you know what, that doesn't really match our process, that's very expensive to change. On the other hand, if you've got rough pages that let them move through the process, they may say, hey, you know what? That's great. We only do this once a year, so let's not put a lot of time in trying to make this beautiful. Let's go on to the other things so we can actually deliver sooner and more efficiently. This is you've probably seen this before. This drawing of two ways of delivering it. Both of these, you end up with a car at the end. But in one way, we start with a tire, and then we kind of build a uh, maybe axles, and then we build the chassis, and then kind of the car without windows, and then we've got the car. The other way, we start with the skateboard, and then kind of turn into a scooter, and then a bike, and then a motorcycle, and a car. So, a question for you: what feedback are you most likely to get if you present the users with a tire? So this idea of we're building software, and one idea is give them something that's not at all what they ask for, but it does some piece of what they ask for, even if it's very, very constrained, versus the car where you're giving them a part of something that they can't actually experience or do anything with. So what feedback are you most likely to get if you print the users with a tire? And TPMS is tire pressure monitor sensor, I think. I don't know why I knew what that stood for. I must have been having trouble with ours on the car at some point. So I would suggest, in my experience of kind of extrapolating for software, you will probably get lots of feedback about the tread pattern, about whether the wheel is made out of chrome, and about whether or not it has tire pressure monitoring systems. Um, they're probably less likely to have anything about this being good for the store, but if they need to go more than a few blocks because they can't use this tire, I guess they could roll the tire next to them, but it's not like they can actually use it for anything. It does not make their life any better at this point because it's just the tire. So you end up getting lots of feedback on things like the tread pattern, chrome, and features like tire pressure management. So in this case, you're not able, since they're not able to actually experience anything with it yet, you're going to get lots of details about the artifact that you've delivered rather than how they're trying to use it. So next question, then, what type of feedback are you likely to get if you give the users a skateboard? So in this case, they've asked for a car because they need to get to these places. They need transportation. And you say, okay, I know you asked for a car, but here, I'll give you a skateboard this week. Try using this and then give us some feedback about it. So the type of feedback that you're likely to look on this probably is not going to at all focus on the tread pattern, right? Because unless that has some bearing on how they're able to use it. In this case, they're going to be very much more focused on what they are trying to achieve from, like, how is this a benefit to them? So they'll probably, one of the things I would expect, like, this works great for going down the block. I can get down to the store, or the kids can take it to school. But if I need to go more than a few miles, I start getting worn out. Or it's easy for me to fall off of. I keep scraping my knee when I fall off. Is there any way to make it more stable? Now, down here, if they say it works on land, but how can we get to Hawaii? Okay, that's kind of crazy. But if they did say that, you may need to really reassess what they're asking for. They may think cars can go through water, but this type of thing is not going to come up if all you've given them a tire and they're focused on the tread pattern and the chrome plating on it and stuff. But you're more likely to find out these things that discover you're not at all aligned with what people are wanting because you gave them something they can actually use that does something within their problem space and hopefully makes their life a little bit better. Now, the other thing that can happen is they might discover, hey, this is great. It turns out we thought we were going to need to go a lot further, but now that I can get back and forth to the school or to the store down the street, I found out that the longer trips I need to do, I can just buy a bus ticket for. So I don't need to invest anymore in this right now. It's great. I've got a skateboard. Let's move on to working on something else. So that's why I think this gets misused in a lot of cases. But the main thing I want you to take away from this is that if we are able to start by focusing on how do we do something for the user, however small, not only will we get better feedback, but we can also get to the point that they may discover when you get to the bicycle that they say, hey, this does 90% of what I need. There's now something else more important. If we just get to the point where we've delivered the chassis of a car, they're still not able to use it for anything. Well, in this scenario or not, I can see, maybe you make a dune buggy or something like that. But the point we're trying to make here is that if we give them the ability to actually make their lives easier and do something in their problem space that gets them closer to their goal, we're going to get better feedback. We're going to get better efficiencies, even though this looks like we're having to do a lot more rework, right? We took, maybe between the skateboard and the scooter, there wasn't that much. But when we got to bicycle, we had to throw most everything away. We had to rewrite most of it to get to that. But we're rewriting it with the knowledge that we've had of the feedback we got. And we're also rewriting it based on they're able to keep using the skateboard while we're building the bicycle. So here's a chart I like, kind of showing that if we have all these different things that we can do, where we've got things that are features that we have to be able to demonstrate, features that are deployable to production, things we need to be viable as a system of record, or other existing features. If we're replacing something, maybe those are all the reports and stuff. And then new features. Depending on how we order those things, if we order it like we did at the top, we can't go live until we get all the way to that last orange one that is a piece that we need to be able to deploy to production. If we use that color, if we arrange things like the color coding below, we're doing more of the skateboard approach, to where we're starting with, hey, we can demonstrate this and start getting feedback. And then the orange is, we can deploy this to production so people can start using a piece of it there. And then now we're to the point where it's viable as a system of record, and we could actually go live with this, maybe running some things on the old system, or maybe it's a really reduced from all the functionality they want, but they're starting getting value from it. But the point is, once we can now have many options of where we go live. We don't get that if we're building the tires and then the axles and building a car up that way. Okay, how are we doing? Oh, good. Okay, so Minecraft and Lego Universe. So here's a question for you. What's your experience with Minecraft? Have you never heard of it? You've played it, you know someone who has played it, or you've heard of it, but you don't know anyone who has played it? What's your experience been with Minecraft? And I have somehow completely messed up my focus on this. There we go, maybe. Okay. Okay, so most of us know someone who has played it or played it ourselves, or at least heard of it, right? We don't have anyone here that says they've never heard of it. All right, so next question. What's your experience with Lego Universe? It's like, what's that? Never heard of it? You think you've heard of it? You played it? You know someone who's played it? Okay, so we've actually got a few people that played it. That's pretty cool. So Minecraft and Lego Universe were kind of in a similar space. I think Minecraft started a little bit early. There's some other things kind of in that space as well. But what's interesting is Lego was very much in the position to be successful with this type of building world. I mean, if you think about Minecraft, we're building things out of blocks, right? Lego should have been very, very much right on that, of saying, hey, we already do this in the physical world. We're going to find a way to do it in our virtual universe. And Lego also spent a lot more money on this, right? Lego Minecraft went live after half a person year. So one person for 6 months was coding this. I think probably even in his spare time. I mean, he put a lot of time in it, but I think he may have been working somewhere else at the time. Lego Universe spent 1,000 person years. They had 250 people for 4 years trying to build this. Lego Universe doesn't even exist anymore. Minecraft has sold for, I can't remember how much, to Microsoft, but very, very, very successful. But it was very different in their approaches here, though, because Minecraft was building stuff live and releasing it as he went. So he got feedback. As a matter of fact, I think he was even coding it live on Twitch or something. So people could watch him code it, and he'd make something, get it out there, get some feedback from it. And it was very, very rapid turnaround. Both of these were Greenfield development. But Lego put so much into waiting to basically betting the farm. I mean, they're bigger companies, but betting the farm on this, that by the time they got ready to go live, and they did go live, it wasn't seen as being successful because they didn't take an incremental approach to it. And these two things, I would encourage you, when you're particularly on a Greenfield project, or any project for that matter, really think about which one are we modeling. And there's some other differences here, but are we taking this huge thing that we're going to work all this time on it and then get feedback from it and maybe discover that people don't like it or the market has moved on? Or are we taking this approach like with Minecraft, where he was delivering stuff every few days or every few weeks, new things were going in, even if it wasn't perfect, but he was getting that feedback as he went, and made for a very compelling game. So be more like Minecraft, probably less like Lego Universe. And I love Lego, so nothing against them, but their skill here was not developing software. I think perhaps they may have been more aligned with the way that they think about creating bricks and manufacturing processes, and maybe didn't take advantage of things they could do necessarily with software. Okay, so two big takeaways here. Prioritize getting feedback on the actual use of the system early and often. Whether you're Greenfield, Legacy, or whatever, this is something you need to do. But it's especially important on Greenfield because on Greenfield, we kind of sometimes have enough runway, or the idea that I've heard people say, we're running a marathon, not a sprint, which is great. That's a good idea to have, as long as you're not using that to say, so we can push off getting feedback till later on. As long as you want to make sure you're prioritizing getting feedback on the actual use of the system early and often. We also want to build in the expectation that we will need to change the system. In many cases, that means building tests as part of what we go. But we need to have the expectation that you will need to change the system. If we have the expectation that we're not going to need to change the system, we're likely to do things in a way that make it hard to change. We're also likely to wait a long time until we get feedback. If I expect to have to change something, I'm a lot more willing to go ahead and get something out the door, get feedback, whether it's let's try using this against the database. Turns out that database doesn't work very well in this particular way. One project I was working on, it was replacing an existing system. We actually, for I think like 6 months, every weekend we kicked off the migration process, because we knew there were things we were going to need to change as part of it. That was just the expectation. We were going to have to change things, and that we'd do things in one part that would slow something else down. So every Friday night, it would kick off this migration process, do a full migration, and then we'd say, how long did it take? Were there any errors? By the time we were ready to actually migrate it, we had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. But the only reason we did that is because we had this expectation that a lot of the stuff we were building was going to need to change. And it made it very comfortable to get something out there, try it, and then figure out how we needed to tweak it. So we're investing a lot in testing everything and in exercising it based on this expectation that things will need to change. Okay, quiz time. So join the quiz. Like I said, we are giving away a t-shirt. So an Agile Lunch and Learn, these fabulous t-shirts that I just printed last week. And I have, I've got medium and larges, and the extra larges I'm getting ready to, I'll print once I get through with some other stuff here. So you will look very good in these. These will make you look, very, very stylish, I'll say. Okay, so that's what we're competing for. Join the quiz. Let me post the link here one more time. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds. We got 6 questions here related to today's content. And the reason I throw these quizzes at the end is I know for me, if I listen to someone talk, I'll remember some of it. If I then have to kind of interact with it by asking some questions and maybe have to choose from the best answer, I remember it a lot better. So in addition to your chance of winning a t-shirt, this is a good way to kind of make sure you get the most value out of the time you have invested here today. Okay, I'll give it 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and you can join later, but your chances of winning might go down. We'll see. Okay, there we go. Okay, what is important when it comes to Greenfield versus Legacy? Is it how many commits are in the code base, how easy it is to change the application, whether we like the previous technology choices, or how long the project has been around? What is important when it comes to Greenfield versus Legacy? And yes, the important thing is how easy is it to change the application. If we don't like the previous technology choices, but it's easy to change, then now it's on us, right? We've got the ability to change to something else. How long the project has been around, like we mentioned from my perspective, the real important thing is how easy it is it to change. Legacy usually has the connotations that something is hard to change. So if we're keeping things easy to change, if it's just as easy to make a change on day 1000 as it was on day 10, then we're doing something different. We're preserving the benefits of Greenfield. And I've actually been on some projects that, because of their investment in testing and their tools, it became easier to make changes in the future instead of harder, which was most projects don't end up doing that, but I've been on some, and it's a great way to work. It's very invigorating. Okay, we've got Chris in the top spot, followed by Lucas, Zach, Natalie, and Astrid. Next question, what is an advantage of starting the users with a skateboard instead of a car tire? Is it because it distracts them from what they ask for? Is it to make sure they have good balance, to get feedback on how they will actually use the solution, or because it requires exercise and healthy and happy users? Healthy users are happy users. Yes, it gets feedback on how they will actually use the solution. I don't know how many times I've been working with users that we're writing software for and found that the most efficient thing to do is to get an idea of what they want and then try to the next day give them the most rudimentary version of that we can, so they can give us feedback on it. Because a lot of times what they say, it turns out isn't really what they mean. And I'm not denigrating users here. That I think that's true for all of us. And the best way to get feedback is actually give you something that you can use. Like, oh, yes, that kind of does what I ask. I see how this does what I ask for, but it turns out what I really need. And then you get that type of feedback. Okay, leaderboard. Chris is still in the top spot, followed by Lucas, Zach, Astrid, and David. Michael Feathers says legacy code is code without what? What does Michael Feathers say legacy code is lacking? Is it code without users, without use cases, without requirements, or without tests? What does Michael Feathers say legacy code is without? And yes, he says it's code without tests. Legacy code is code without tests. And it ties into that other definition of saying it's code that you don't feel safe to change. If your code is well tested, it gives you the confidence to make changes. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's always easy to change, but if you're in a situation where you have tests for your code and you find something and say, hey, I wish this worked another way, you can try it, right? You can make the change and then see if it works. And if the application has always been in that state, the chances of you being in a situation where you don't feel you can change something are a lot lower, because anything that you wanted to change, you probably changed as you discovered it. And that's a great place to be. Okay, leaderboard, we've got Chris, Lucas, Zach, Astrid, and Natalie. What is a disadvantage of starting users with the car tire when they ask for a car? Is it because it requires less rework, because you don't have to switch from a skateboard to a bicycle? If a bike would have met their needs, you will still build a car. Or the color of the car isn't discussed, or they can't fill it with gasoline until later. So a disadvantage of starting users with the car tire when they ask for a car, oftentimes I hear people say that they think it's an advantage of starting with a car tire, because you're going to build that tire and then you don't have to touch that tire. And then you're going to build the axle and then you don't have to touch that axle. So usually when people are trying to justify a build the car by building the tire first approach, the reason they're suggesting that is because they believe it will require less rework. But if we do that approach, the disadvantage is going to be that if a bike would have met their needs, they will still build a car, because there's no way for them to, as they go, discover that, hey, this is we're fine with just a bike. Once we get to a certain thing, even though we would never thought of to ask for a bike, it turns out that does 99% of what we need, so we're good with that. Let's invest in something else. Okay, we've got Chris is still in the top spot. Chris has the fast finger, evidently. We've got Lucas, Astrid, Robert, and Natalie. Next question, what is a downside of having no constraints? You can spend more time trying to make a perfect decision at the expense of getting feedback. Technology is expensive. You won't know what programming language to use, or you might start singing songs from Disney musicals. Which could be a serious threat, right? But it probably wasn't mentioned in this. Okay, so 4% of us think that the problem is we might start singing songs from Disney musicals. Okay. The answer I was going for from this talk was you can spend more time trying to make a perfect decision at the expense of getting feedback. If you have no constraints, remember the thing with all the different ingredients, the fewer constraints I have, the harder it's going to be for us to pick what we're going to have for dinner. Matter of fact, I may just give up with all those ingredients, say, let's go to McDonald's, let's go out to eat, because it's too hard to make a decision. Okay, I think this will come on the last question. Chris still retains the fastest finger here and getting right answers, followed by Lucas, Robert, Astrid, and Jim D. Last question. What were the two main takeaways from this talk? So choose two things here. Get feedback on actual use early and often. Don't hire acrobats to build software. Nachos require limited ingredients. Build in the expectations of change. And curly-tailed animals eat snakes. Now, there are a lot of things I may have said, but there's two things that were like, okay, I think we're on the right track here. So get feedback on actual use early and often. And yes, build in the expectation of change. So very good. And Chris, it looks like you took the top spot. So if you want to email me your shirt size, if it's medium or large, we'll get it out right away. If it's something else, or if it's extra large, I'll get it in the next, once I get the other stuff printed. So read slower, Jake. Yes. Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. That covers what I wanted to cover today. I will stick around for a few minutes in case anyone wants to chat. But thank you so much for coming. And if you've ever got something you want to discuss or chat about, hit reply on anything you get from me. I would love to hear from you and talk about whatever you've got going on. And like I said, if you've got, if you're going to be at the DevOps days or KCDC coming up later, look for me. I'm going to be at both of those things. As a matter of fact, the KCDC one, I'm doing a workshop with all those little robots. I spent yesterday making sure all the robots were charged and updated, and there was lots of beeping and chirping going on. It was exciting.
So I have a quick question.
Yes.
Lately, on the team that I've been in, I've been kind of trying to have conversations about exactly what we're talking about, like a skateboard versus a car, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of heading there and like, how do we start small? Are there some extra resources that you might suggest that maybe I can share with my team to kind of help illustrate that point more? I know that's a big topic. I know there's a lot there. I just didn't know if there was something maybe off the top of your head that I can bring up just to kind of be like, oh, this is something that kind of really helps illustrate this point. Does it make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think so. So you're trying to get people to see the value of doing small things, delivering
Right.
small. Okay.
Exactly. Like fail fast, fail cheaply, find out what we don't know, get it out, get it in front of people, as opposed to, hey, we really have this one idea. Let's put a lot of polish on it. Let's make sure everything's perfect before we get it out into front of people. And I'm just trying to kind of get them to think more about that idea of, let's just build small, see if it's even a problem first before we start engineering solutions for it. And those kind of like that mentality of just looking at the small piece versus the larger piece first.
So when you bring up those types of things, what type of pushback are you getting?
This is the decision we've made, right? Is a really difficult one. That's really it. Like, well, we need this. This is table stakes and things of that nature. And so it's kind of like these. It almost feels like because I said so kind of stuff that you'll hear like from parents. And I don't think that there's any malice or anything in it,
Mhm.
or and I don't think that people are opposed. I just don't know that they actually see the value of starting with a skateboard versus we already know that we need to build the car. We already know that we need to build out this feature for our customers. So why don't we just go build that feature first? Does that make sense?
Yes. Have you ever, do you have any, is there any like cultural knowledge or experience of situations they've been in where they built something and it turned out it wasn't as useful as they thought it was going to be?
Yeah, the project that I'm on now, currently, they've tried it before and it failed
Okay.
for similar reasons.
Okay. So if you can, because things that people have experienced as pain,
Mhm.
and showing how this might be a different approach that might reduce the risks that they incurred before, sometimes that can be a good way to kind of get people thinking about what, because oftentimes I hear people say, oh, well, we need to have a, I'm sorry, this project has to have a fixed date. And if you
Mhm.
ask and say, have any of our fixed date projects ever not met the date? They're like,
Mhm.
yes. Like, okay, then the fixed date doesn't really mean anything. It may be what we're targeting, but we have a history and evidence that that doesn't mean it will get done by that date just because we set a date. Is there anything we can do to actually lower our risk? So a couple things that I would suggest. So one thing I try to talk to people about is thinking in terms of, is there any possible future that we would be able to start getting value or we would need to go live without everything that's being described here? And usually you can make a case for saying, yes, there's like if everybody gets sick on the team and or something big happens or the cells or there's a pandemic or whatever, there might be a smaller set of features that we would be willing to go live without. And then say, okay, if there is some risk that that could happen, some possibility, there's some future that that could happen in, let's make sure we order our work in such a way that it would that we'd be happy with what we had done. Like future selves would say, yes, I'm glad you did this in the past because these unexpected things happened.
Mhm.
So those questions like, is there any possible future that we would like to have A before B or B before A? If there is, let's go ahead and do that now, because we can't go into the past and change what we did, but we can make the decision now that our future selves will be happy with. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, I think those are two good examples to kind of ruminate on it and see where I can, rooting it in a problem of the past and then kind of being like, here's a pain point that we experience, let's
Right.
try to avoid that. And then the idea of, thinking about like if we're already going to potentially be in a solution where or a situation where this might happen, maybe we just plan for it now. I guess it's kind of what you were saying there at the end.
Right. And another piece of it too is getting people to think in terms of if we build everything and then show it to the customer, and particularly if you can reference some cases where this has happened at your company. But I've been in a lot of situations where when we give them the drop dead simple version that we think is so simple they won't want it, but it lets them actually exercise it, that we then discover that that piece is not necessarily, it's important, but it doesn't have to be fancy.
Hmm.
And so once we're able to solve the need, we would have spent 10 times as long trying to do everything that we thought they needed. But then we find out this thing they asked for is very, very important. It's very, very important, but they only do it once a year. So they don't care how ugly it is or how convoluted it is to make it work. It's just a matter of it. They need to be able to do it, but in the simplest way possible meets all their needs. And if we deliver that and if we can discover that on just a few things, that means we're able to work on the other stuff that's more important, and it reduces our risk of the project getting canceled or failing.
For sure. Awesome. Thanks.
Cool, good question. Any other questions, thoughts, aggravation? Excuse me.
So I wanted to come back to legacy and heritage.
Uh-huh.
Because legacy in general, English, as I learned it, is just what was given to us from our forefathers. So it's something when people are very proud about, oh, that's a legacy. That's what I got from the people before me. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Is the legacy we have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in general, it's very, very positive. It's just negative in computer science. The connotation of being bad, a legacy system, is only in computer science and IT systems.
So I wonder if it's not so much that it's bad, but like you can't change your legacy, right? The legacy that you've been given from your forefathers, it's not something that you actually have control over.
Yeah,
I can't change what my the people I'm descended from did.
But you would never, when I say I work on a legacy system, no one would say, oh, yay, good for you.
Right.
So, and so that's why I use heritage for the ones I use that are old or that I work on that are really, really easy to change.
Mm-hmm.
Because heritage doesn't have the negative connotation legacy systems have in computer science.
That is interesting. What's the German word for it?
We don't use it in computer science. We say geerbt, but that doesn't have any. That's not good or bad. It's just
Okay.
a fact. And we can't. I don't think we have something like. Maybe we have. I should have looked it up before making my point. But there is really. I once read, I think it was also from the English, that legacy is not handing down the ashes, but handing on the fire. So that's
I'm
It's
not
something,
sure. I'm not sure that legacy always has a positive connotation, even about other things, because
but it's in
Yeah, I was
other,
gonna say it doesn't always in the US. It definitely has a negative at times, especially, like getting into the Ivy Leagues, you're a legacy. That's a very negative connotation because you haven't worked for it. You've just been handed
right.
something.
And and
okay.
and that's where I'm thinking it mostly has to do something that it's there, but it's not something that you built, and it's not something you can do anything about. You can't change it to make it do other things, or at least not very easily.
Okay.
So there may be some nuances here in the, but I like the heritage idea. I'm gonna have to see if I can maybe borrow that from you.
As long as you attribute, it's okay.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah, I
Yeah,
got,
good
I
point.
have,
That's you got me thinking. I'm going to go find my look up some stuff in my Oxford English dictionary when I get through here, which
yeah,
is
because
becoming increasingly hard to read since it prints 8 pages per spread.
yeah,
Cool. Thanks,
okay.
Astrid.
Yeah,
Any other
so
questions or thoughts, suggestions?
Will you cover
I
this
have,
topic again or like a similar, topic align with this?
What would you like to see in if we did something similar? What would be interesting?
Um, so I've lived through a couple of projects that failed spectacularly, but I think I learned, like I felt it was valuable each time.
Hmm.
Um, One was actually both were all of them were pretty much, and when we term Greenfield is just something that's new to everyone. They haven't done it before.
Okay.
Um, so one of them was a major scientific application, and it was vaporware for it was anyways, it was a whole saga. But the end result was that it failed spectacularly, and we get to redo it a couple times, and by the end they got it right. But it was just wild because it was all about feedback, to your point. So it'd be great to know like tips and tricks to avoid like project failure. It's like again, I don't think it's failure because you're always learning, right? You end up succeeding in the end. But, is there a way to shrink down that process, be smarter? And granted, a lot of them were before Agile. One was not, one was recently, 3+ years and spectacular waste of money.
Yes.
But, live through it. Agile helped. Folding the team down and starting over helped, but I don't know, it'd be great to just know like how do you handle those situations like um where you walk in and it's just, so many things are wrong.
So just a thought kind of related to that is sometimes getting a project canceled sooner is
Hmm.
success. So I've been on some projects that I was an agile coach for, and we were trying to I was trying to influence the team this way of the kind of things we talked about. And there were some very loud voices that were trying to influence it. And I mean, like literally a year of trying to build out stuff before they were going to start on even seeing if they were capable of producing the software. Um, and that the one I'm thinking of actually eventually got canceled. I feel that my contribution may have been to make it more evident that the direction they're going was going to be too expensive. And so sometimes getting project canceled so things can regroup and they can try it a different way is actually success. If it would take you 5 years of really expensive and you're able to do something to discover it in 3 years, that may be success. The other thing that might be, I don't think I've done like the cost of delay talk recently. I'll probably ought to do that one again because that kind of touches on how to have these conversations about what are we if we're choosing to do if we're choosing to do A instead of B, what's the cost of waiting on B? And is that actually the right decision? Can we justify that? Or should we
I
do
think
B first?
that's I think that's the right theme is that,
Okay.
fail fast, um, bringing bad news when
Right.
nobody wants to hear it because it took a lot of socialization and some of them I had directly had input on, other ones I was like the first one that was the scientific application, enterprise-wide application. That was I was a fly on the wall. That was my first kind of view of when a major project spectacularly fails. But
Uh,
again, I think it was success by the end. But the others, yeah, I agree. I mean, like, I think that a lot of people might be very interested in, like, when you fall into a project and you're the bearer of bad news, how do you fail fast? How do you socialize that? You know, because you're right. I mean, you know, a typical software engineering team could be 1.2 to 2 million a year.
Mhm.
That's a lot of money.
And maybe even dramatically more than that, depending on the size of
Absolutely.
the. It's there's sometimes, well, we need to go faster, so let's like triple the size of the team and add a bunch of people to slow everybody that was there first down, and so that's okay. Cool, good. I'll try to. I think that I ought to do the cost of delay. I think that would be really useful. I see some other people wanted to see stuff about vertical slicing. I've had done a few of those, but I haven't done one recently. At least you want to see uh, projects and storylines. I generally talk about a lot of stuff kind of in general terms, because some of the things I had contracts saying I wouldn't talk about it too much, but I'll see if I can get more stuff that I can give actually examples, because that's a good idea, Alicia. Did you have something, Astrid? I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I thought on what Liza said, and I heard recently heard the sentence, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." Maybe you can also go on how we can learn from the failures we live through, and what agile methods or possibilities we have to really learn and really make something out of the experience, instead of, well, yeah, that's gone, let's go away and do something else.
Or let's go do the same thing again without learning from it. That's probably the worst outcome.
Yeah.
Cool. It's great feedback. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to have to drop off here, but I hope to see you. I need to figure out what we're doing for next week. I can't remember if that's the one where I'm tied up, but be watching for an invite coming out to that. Hope to see you next week, next time we get together. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.